it actually closer to the river. We're looking from the riverside, so what you're seeing, in fact, is an elongated space. From the other side, the building shortens. Here's the riverfront apartments, and there is another idea on the actually esplanade in front of the boulevard, where we thought, since corporations weren't going to have leagues of secretaries and clerks and all those things anymore, because they would simply do all their business over their telephone, all they needed were monuments like Grant's tomb along the riverfront. And for the privilege of having that monument there, they would, in fact, keep the grass clean. And here, in the tradition of trying to work with artists, is, in fact, Frank Geary's hop-up of our hop-up. That's the interior of the bathhouse. And one night when we were, very late at night, when we were working very hard on this, building this model, Frank stumbled in. I don't know what he'd had to drink, and offered, in fact, to help us with the design of the bathhouse. So that's Frank's bathhouse there, underneath glass. And there it is from afar. Now, look at that.
I like that.
We like the slow fades. The slow fades. Those are real good. Is this yours now? I like this. Is this mine? Well, I think that's absolutely wonderful. It's the real problem is that you very rarely see a drawing of a building which has the interest and the wonder in its contours and its construction and all the control surfaces and all of those things that a very simple drawing of an aircraft has. Oh, I wish you well.
With this back and forth.
Are we going back and forth?
Yeah. I don't quite know how we both came upon this shared interest, but it probably was always something that was in us from way, way, way back. I know for myself, and probably lots of you, building with Erector Sets and making little model airplanes, and I know even stronger with Craig being stranded there in the Midwest growing up as a young chap. It's fairly flat. You don't have to worry about mountains. There are not too many trees, and building model airplanes is a wonderful way to spend year after year. And and he built many, and some of the finest ones that were seen. I think one of his best ones. Somehow, somebody sat on it during the judging, or it crashed. I think that was it during the, and that led into Craig's building model cars, and entering them in the GM competition, and finally winning and going to General Motors and studying automotive design. And I don't know. Somehow we both share an intrigue with, enjoyment of making things, whether it's, and in our case, the only thing that we can do is make drawings and models and remake our cars. And because we aren't directly making buildings, but in fact we are making buildings, and we enjoy incredibly the actual fabrication of all of the parts, trying to design them all, and design the sequencing of all these parts going together to make a building. So at the same time, I guess that we're trying to deal with spaces, the making of spaces, that the way that they're formed is not through a anonymous container, but a container which has information through the making of all its parts. The kind of intrigue with all the tiny little balsa wood ribs in an airplane wing covered with a skin.
Wait a minute, that airplane there, I have to tell you about this plane because when we were in Essex, Connecticut, in the back of the shoe factory, Robert would finish all day's work on the building, and then he would go over to a little table he had in the corner, and he was building that airplane. It took him weeks and weeks and weeks, and there was no place around Essex to build it or to fly it, and so we were just desperate to fly the plane. It wasn't until we got to New York City, the first weekend after leaving Essex. It was in September, and we decided we would take it to Central Park and fly it. And we were convinced it wouldn't fly, firstly. I mean, really convinced. And those airplanes have little motors or little timers on them which shut off the motor at a specified time. But we were absolutely convinced that it would never fly. And the motor started on perhaps the second or third flip. And Robert launched it, and it began without the timer, and began to climb in this wonderful, wonderful, slow spiral climb, and it just kept going up and kept going up, and we began running. And we chased it all the way to the East River, and it disappeared somewhere into Rhode Island.
Well, and I'm not sure whether we enjoy making model airplanes or fixing our cars more than the making of a model or a building. But this is an early project of Craig's when he was I think it's your thesis project, year before, of a in this case it's a housing system that is not just doesn't deal with. In fact, I think very, in a kind of modern way, deals with circulation problems, the sizes and shapes of spaces and so on. It just deals with that sort of routine. But the enormous preoccupation is with the making of the walls and the ceilings. In this case, it's a prefabricated, what was it, a fiberglass molded system. Which is a kind. This is, and then another system. This is your thesis project, which is the training from the designing of automobiles, dealing with sheet steel, led into, in this case, the making of a housing project using that same technology. The limitations in room widths. The part that you see here is the core of the building, containing the kitchen and bathrooms and stairways and so on, are the sizes and shapes and so on are dealing with the limitations of the technology and are in fact involved with and stretching what those technologies can do in order to make a part which has information in it, certainly has utility, but also has information. It's not an anonymous part. The Creative Plaything store, as was described earlier, was made up of two kinds of parts. The parts were made of aluminum, fabricated like ductwork. Ed Bernstein, who made Don Judd's work, also made ductwork, pop riveted together. The little Allen head wrench is operating a cam lock, which then joins these parts together, so the entire system could be put up in about a day or a day and a half, taken down, moved to another space. The parts had within them the entire electrical system of the store. These plugged together. And when we were doing these, we discovered something that we could, in the fabrication of something, we could implant information or not implant information. And this toy store, and in a kind of corny way, was made up of large blocks, much like children's blocks. And I think we originally had a model maker, this was in New York, make some rectangular blocks that were thick shelves, both the vertical and the shelf itself, the horizontal part, as rectangular units. And we got them back, and they weren't. They basically made the parts of the store which could be occupied by the merchandise, and so on. They functioned well, but they didn't begin to make spaces or have any kind of other content to it. And we then made this other part, which was a kind of funny angle with a curve on the front, which was very much like a children's block of the same shape, whether it was the triangular block or the block with a curve in it, or the half circle block or the quarter circle block. And if you had those blocks as a kid, you could make wonderful things, castles with little roofs, and the roofs are identified as roofs. Either it was a curve or it was a pointed roof, or whatever. If you didn't have those kind of blocks, if you just had the rectangular ones, then you had a kind of series of anonymous buildings, none of them distinguished from one another. And so I often remember kind of losing the important blocks, the blocks with information, the ones that were, again, in this case, fabricated with that information built into them, and then not being able to sort of do what you wanted to do. This was a project for some cardboard furniture, 3-ply corrugated cardboard. In this case, it was die cut by kind of, I guess, the largest machine we could find. It was back in New Jersey, and just after the manufacturing of this, in fact, during the manufacturing of this furniture, the manufacturer went out of business, not due to our involvement with him, but I think we stretched his machinery to the limit. And this involved, it came from a notion that kind of is in almost every architecture school in the last 20 years of making cardboard furniture as a problem. But somehow we found the material. I think it was some students in New York, something called Tri-Wall, which was 3-ply corrugated cardboard, which had an incredible strength. It was a military product. And we thought, well, this could be a way in which to make furniture out of cardboard that would be permanent and then be sellable, and we were going to make a big killing on this project, as a matter of fact, and retire. So then the material, and in this case it was designed to have each of the little packages to have 3 sheets. The packages were shrink wrapped with much like a record, and in fact the furniture was thought to be very much like buying records in a record store. I think we saw these things lined up in the front. I think our image was that these packages, which are 30 inches wide, 50 inches high, 1.5 inches thick, 3 sheets of corrugated cardboard, were going to line the entire front of almost every supermarket lobby in America. And people were just going to be throwing them in their shopping carts and going away. And so the furniture was designed. There was an attempt to make a strong graphic, therefore, not make the furniture anonymous, but make it have content by the making of the part. And then we had a great search to find a manufacturer to be able to do the thing, and there were only. And Craig kind of gave up on it out here after working out all the shapes and sent it back to me, and I had to search for I don't know, months and months to find. I think there were only 2 people, one with a corrugated cardboard die cutting machine, the person that went out of business in New Jersey, and someone up in Connecticut who had a shrink wrapping machine that could do a piece this large. This is out of order. We're going back and forth here, so we'll skip those every once in a while. This was done just at the same time the furniture was being done, and it was again our preoccupation with the making of and the fabrication of, whether it's a part, and in this case it's a whole building. Everything that is seen as one of the parts which makes up this, which is the child care center, became a part which formed the various spaces. It became concrete block as single units were added up and became walls. Bar joists, which are again come as single units, were added up and made the ceiling of the room. The ductwork became, as Craig described earlier, the accessories in the street. The conduit in the entire building, that's the corrugated cardboard furniture. The conduit became another kind of accessory. And at the child care center, I think the fabricating of the building took precedence over almost everything else. And so that the making of aside from the circulation of the building, the spaces being the right size and order and so on, that's a kind of given. But the presence of the space and the sequencing and the hierarchy of the spaces was not seen as important as the fabricating of the building. And so therefore, I think the building was called once a building and an air conditioning system in search of a building, because all these things, the bar joists, the ducts, and so on, they all had a place, and they all became the various accessories, walls, et cetera, the ceilings, and to the point where we were kind of overwhelmed with finding and locating every single pipe. We've in this case, the New South Side have begun to get this under control, so that those parts that are fabricated are not to glorify themselves, which I think is something which came out of the Bauhaus, expressing the material, expressing the structural system, et cetera, for their own sake. Now we're trying to kind of harness this, and it's a kind of technology. Some of it's high tech and some of it's low tech, in order to create forms and shapes which have content. In this case, it's a galvanized panel with a round circle in it in the central building that looks out into the courtyard, surrounded by two conduit boxes which serve as a transition for the conduit coming around, making those two curves and going and connecting two parts of the building. And that part then becomes a graphic image, a memorable image, not an anonymous image, in the building. Every single part of this, well, as many as I guess as we could of the present South Side building, whether it's concrete block, conduit with little stone coat lights, flashing, cement asbestos panels, or a galvanized roof, they're all put together, much like making a model airplane, much like making an Erector set. But they're put together in a way in which they make shapes, and the shapes are things which define spaces and sequence the spaces. This is the cement asbestos cladding system of the building, which is seen much like a blanket covering a concrete block building, made of 2-foot wide panels attached to the building with insulation in between. The little Phillips head screws are 8 inches on center. When they reach a horizontal piece of corrugated, or excuse me, of cement asbestos, they form a pattern which has been designed in order to mark a spot, and the sequence of spots makes a kind of texture. The flashing up above and the stepping of flashing marks the front of the theater, marks that spot. The kind of lower edge of the window on some large windows, which are very special on the north side of the building, is marked by, in this case, it's a windowsill, but a half-circle windowsill, which is part of the cement asbestos cladding system, one of the shapes available to us. There were only flat sheets, 1/8 of an inch thick, 4 by 8, 1/4 of an inch thick, 4 by 8, half circles, and L-shaped pieces, both with an 8-inch dimension, and then a way in which those are attached. And of course, the larger sheets can be cut up. And in this case, the L shape becomes an eyebrow over that same window to give it importance. Particle board surfaces in a kind of storage area in the building become seen as in a similar way to the cement asbestos panels on the outside of the building, a part which is put onto the concrete block in order to do something to it, and in the way it's put on in order to mark that spot again. The precast concrete Flexicor system, which is the flooring system and the roofing system for the building, was built in such a way that we left an 8-inch space about every 10 feet and filled it with a fabricated, galvanized, what we call a light trough, which is a place where the conduit runs in the building. The light trough is used as a device in the loft spaces in the building to make the ceiling not anonymous. It becomes 2 lines in the ceiling. And then the light fixtures, which we also designed, in this case, it's a light fixture which plugs into that light trough, incandescent light, also designed in order to function certainly as a light, but in order to have a shape which is memorable and which is not like other shapes that you would find in the building. So that place has its identity by these light fixtures. That's a switcheroo on the trays here. The that same galvanized system in the metal system in the building is used in this case as a radiator and container for the conduit in the lower level against the wall. And then finally some large columns in the courtyard, galvanized metal, 2 feet in diameter, not anonymous, filled with concrete, to mark and be different from other parts of the building.
I think we've got to move faster a little bit. So we're going to hurry up now. It's racehorse time. The point of all that stuff is to get people involved, finally. I mean, what we're really interested in doing is somehow, with the furniture, getting people involved with what we do, as in making something themselves. So this is my son making up that punch-out furniture and enjoying it, having an appetite for it, getting off on it. We, of course, got off on it by doing graphics and instruction booklets and things like that. Assembly and the choreography of assembly got to be something that was really the dynamic of all the design. The designs that we were doing for some time had a lot to do with reaching back into the process and describing in some way, in fact, very similar to what Tom and Mike, I think, are doing in some of the work they showed last week, getting into the cartoon of assembly, getting people involved with idea of making themselves. So here in that prefab housing project, there were several steps. You first, in a very orderly way, put the large utility beams into place, and then people were encouraged to build their own, to do their own interior renovation on that. All we wanted to provide was a matrix. In this project, which Eugene Kupper and Peter de Bretteville and I did, assembly, again, was a matter of great priority, to the point where we were even working out the crews of men necessary to perform the erection operations. Again, these slides, somehow we started off on left and should have started on right, I guess. But the whole enterprise was governed by the idea of assembly, and the design was dictated by the exigencies of putting one part on the other in a proper order. The crossover point got to be where we realized, or woke up with a start and thought, gee whiz, the way people have always participated in architecture itself is a dynamic. That if you provide a space which is a kind of background for activity, if the space in fact doesn't usurp the activity of the people, then the people themselves within the space and what's happening to them within the space, old, tired idea, but actually works, started to be something which was of great concern to us. And it's very difficult to put a mark on when that happened. It was certainly at some point when we were working on the Roosevelt housing project, I think. So we began de-escalating the technology of the building in terms of its adventurousness, certainly not in terms of its care, I think, and emphasizing the participatory aspect. So in the Minneapolis tune-up project, there were, 75 or 100 little sketches which accompanied that, which showed how people moved through the spaces and how you used all the various attributes of it. There's the perspective shortening building. And these things began to be based on perceptions as opposed to being based on technologic priorities. Perception took a big part, big chunk of the design. And suddenly, instead of axonometrics, perspective moved into place as something which gave the human point of view as opposed to a detached scientific kind of technologic view. One without perspective is not a human one. The human view always diminishes in size as things get further away from you. They're less threatening, perhaps, or they're more enticing. They're less likely to impinge on your life, so they're smaller. The things very close to you, like this, is bigger than anyone in the audience in my sphere of vision. So, but in axonometric, you guys would all be equal. So that's the point at which perspective begins to come in as a way of conceiving what a space is. And we began conceiving spaces in that mode. For the Roosevelt Island project, we actually did a little storyboard. Here we are driving down the East River Drive, looking through our car windshield at the project on the other side of the street, or other side of the river. Oh, that's out of, oh, these are all out of sequence, aren't they? Well, this will be very meaningful. You drive in, you get out of your car, you remember what this slide was until you see the next slide, and this is where you first meet the mascot of the whole housing project, who is a large bronze suckling pig, because the island used to be called Hog Island. So you come over and you rub its ear, which gets bronze. Here's where you're getting out of the truck. You see the pig in front of you. There's the sward, grassy sward in front of you, where you can see whether there are other people around. You walk up there, you come to an overlook where you look out into the courtyards of the village. And finally, you arrive at the waterfront where you enjoy the view of Manhattan from a promenade full of daycare centers and laundromats and statuary derived from last year at Marienbad. And for South Side, we even, oh, now this is going to make absolutely no sense. I don't think so. I don't think there's any way to do it. But for the South Side project, Bob referred to the fact that the theater was off-axis, was kind of kinked over. And that actually arose from a fantasy that we had about the way such a place would evolve were it to be an agrarian society, were it to be a society where this community center would evolve over time rather than be built at one point in time. And we thought that originally there would be a manor house, which is the building with the curved roof, and a barn, which is the theater, and that those might be along a rustic country road, which is there. And they would be sitting there very casually, not embraced by the net of streets. And then for a celebration of some sort, that central courtyard would be temporarily walled in, which is what you saw on the slide just before. And now this is the final state where the courtyard on the other side has been roofed over with a temporary steel structure. And the final state of the whole building. So that we kind of saw the building as evolving through time with parts and then finally being renovated in such a way that we tried to add a sort of choreographic richness, I suppose, to its existence. And this is a little sequence, actually, of now entering the building. There's a line of houses down the street which sort of look like that, and they have asbestos shingles, and this has asbestos shingles. They have roofs of shapes something like that, and they sit on the street. And we thought it was very important that if you were entering something which had a city kind of character, that you would enter a ramp and have an overview of where you were. So even though there are no hills in Columbus, and even though there was no reason whatsoever to have a ramp, the entrance, the major entrance to the building, is up that ramp. And you continue up the ramp, and your view is very much masked and very much hidden as you go up the ramp. Oh, well, they're still out of sequence, aren't they? Right. And you have to then come around and under this very dark space behind a convex toward you wall, which is squeezing you down. And it really looks as though the future is not very bright, I think, at this point of your trip. And then you walk out through that door that you see right there in the center of the picture and find yourself in command of the entire courtyard, which is deployed below you. And you're making an entrance on a major stage. You are framed in the proscenium and are the principal actor, so far as anyone is concerned. Coming down from that point, which is not in the photograph, will be a sculpture, a stair, actually, a functional stair, which Alice Aycock is building. This is the view that you would have just before you stepped out of that door. I'm sorry that it was out of sequence. There's a similar sequence on the other side. At night, I think this side will be especially interesting because the side is about 200 feet long of the building, and at the end furthest away from you, there's a 150-watt light bulb on the side of the building just over the loading dock. And below this little R2-D2 electrical cube, there are 2,000 watts of quartz light. Those are the only two lights along the side of the building. And again, the effect is, hopefully, to make a very, very dramatic place for your entrance. You enter below that, perhaps your hair burns. You wear a hat, and Oh, they're very bad layout. We'll just skip. And you walk into a kind of very private square chamber with a mark of an X on top of it. And through that door into, where's the space? No space. No space. We missed it. You blew it. Well, I can't catch up to this now, can I? The machine won't work. It's great being outgunned by technology. I love it. This is just about this is the end anyway. But that concern with the choreography of people in a space, which has really become our driving motive in the last couple of years, is finding a very, very natural resting place in the film world as well, because the whole nature of a film, of course, is to focus on people in environments as opposed to simply the environments. And there's a tremendous sort of reciprocal relationship between film environments and architectural ones. And that little set of images you just saw have something to do with the film Ecotopia. And here you see the president of Ecotopia with her shoes off, standing on a redwood balcony in San Francisco with a view of the world. And I suspect that's sort of the direction our work is going. Thank you. Do you want to thank me? Oh, did you? Really? Robert just told me that somehow in our opening remarks we'd forgotten, he thinks, to mention Frank Lupo, who was absolutely major, formidable mainstay of the entire operation for the past couple of years. And if we did, it's, yes, he really deserves a hand. If anybody's interested, we have a little coda of just some pretty views of Southside, if you want to see them. If you don't, we won't show them. Yeah. Show them? Yeah. Turn them on again. What?
Don't have to worry about the sequence here.
No, yeah, we don't have to worry about the sequence. It's great. Oh, that's a fighter plane. There we are. It's hard to imagine it without all the construction debris around, because we kind of like it. Thank you.